From the moment humans first looked upward, the night sky has been more than a simple canvas of distant lights. For countless generations, the stars were maps, calendars, and divine scriptures written in glowing points across the heavens. Before the printing press, before written alphabets, before centralized kingdoms, there was the sky. And among all the celestial patterns, one figure has haunted humanity's imagination across continents, cultures, and epochs: Orion. His belt of 3 stars, so distinct and orderly, seemed to demand recognition. To some, he was a hunter chasing eternal prey. To others, he embodied gods of resurrection and death. To the ancient Egyptians, he was the great Osiris himself, the Lord of rebirth. But what if Orion was more than a symbol? What if these stars formed part of a secret code? One that ancient civilizations carved into stone, aligned with temples, and passed down through cryptic myths, a code that might point not just to the origins of their knowledge, but to the future disasters of our world. This is not merely poetic speculation. When we study the alignments of sacred sites, the geometry of the pyramids, the mysterious texts etched into tomb walls, and the myths that survived centuries of retelling, a pattern begins to emerge. It suggests that the ancients were not only keen observers of the night sky, but also guardians of a cosmic message, a message written in light, geometry, and prophecy. The sky as the first scripture, imagine standing on the sands of the Nile thousands of years ago. There were no street lamps, no glowing cities drowning the darkness. The stars blazed with an intensity few of us can imagine today. For the priests and astronomers of Egypt, the heavens were a living, shifting manuscript. The rising of Sirius marked the annual flood of the Nile, the life-giving inundation that determined whether crops would thrive or famine would reign. The movements of Orion and other constellations provided seasonal markers, but perhaps also hints of grander cycles, catastrophic, repeating events etched into the rhythm of the cosmos. Ancient people did not separate myth from science. Their deities were the stars, and their stories were astronomy, told in allegory. When they spoke of gods rising, dying, or battling serpents in the sky, they may have been encoding celestial mechanics, comet strikes, or cosmic disasters in symbolic form. The myth was the vessel. The astronomy was the payload. The mystery of Orion. Why then Orion? Out of thousands of stars, why do these 3 simple points and their surrounding constellation carry such weight? Perhaps because Orion's belt is so geometrically precise, so instantly recognizable, that it becomes an anchor for human memory. Perhaps because Orion straddles the celestial equator, visible from nearly every inhabited corner of the Earth, making him a universal figure. But there may be another, darker reason. Orion may have been a cosmic warning sign. Ancient builders might have aligned monuments not merely for ceremonial grandeur, but to preserve a star map that connected earthbound survival with the heavens. The Great Pyramids of Giza, as we will explore, are said to mirror the belt stars of Orion. Was this alignment symbolic of the god Osiris, or was it an encoded pointer to something catastrophic, a marker of time, cycles hidden in stone? History versus mystery. Mainstream archaeology assures us that the pyramids were tombs, that alignments are coincidences, and that myths are simply poetic tales. But alternative researchers argue that this narrative is incomplete, perhaps even deliberately minimized. The Egyptians themselves called the pyramids houses of eternity, not simple graves. And their texts often blur the line between myth and cosmic instruction. This is the tension that runs through our investigation. Was the sky merely inspiration for stories and ritual, or was it the blueprint of survival, encoded by ancient masters who saw further into the future than we dare imagine? The cosmic shadows of disaster throughout history, civilizations have risen and fallen, sometimes abruptly and catastrophically. Floods, plagues, comets, earthquakes, often blamed on angry gods or cosmic will. But what if some of these events were anticipated, tracked in the heavens, and immortalized in stone? If Orion was a signpost, it may not have pointed to gods at all, but to disasters, celestial events that repeat in cycles longer than human lifespans, but detectable through star watching. Some researchers suggest that ancient texts, from Egyptian pyramid texts to Sumerian tablets, contain references to cycles of destruction, often tied to star alignments or heavenly omens. If true, then Orion may have been a clock, a celestial hand marking epochs of upheaval. Why hide a warning? If the ancients had this knowledge, why cloak it in myth and symbol instead of stating it plainly? One reason may be survival. Knowledge too dangerous or destabilizing might have been restricted to priestly castes, hidden from the common people. Another possibility, they believed future generations would only recognize the code when the time was right. The sky would be the key, the monuments the lock, and the disasters themselves the revelation. A story written in the heavens, so we begin our journey under Orion's gaze. From Egypt's desert sands to temples scattered across the globe, from star charts carved in stone to suppressed manuscripts, we will follow the cosmic breadcrumbs. The story we uncover will challenge mainstream history, suggesting that the ancients were not primitive builders, but cosmic archivists. We will see how their knowledge may link directly to us, our time, our fragile modern civilization, and the disasters we face. For if the ancients saw themselves as living within cycles, then perhaps we too are entering the next turn of that cosmic wheel. This is the hidden language of the stars, a language that speaks not only of gods and myths, but of warnings, survival, and destiny. And at its center stands Orion, the hunter, the god, the mapmaker of the cosmos. Since the earliest days of human memory, the constellation of Orion has occupied a place of deep reverence and mystery. To the naked eye, it appears simple, three bright stars arranged neatly in a row, flanked by a larger constellation of glittering companions. Yet this formation is so distinct, so geometrically precise, that it could not escape the attention of ancient peoples across the world. Unlike the more chaotic scatterings of other constellations, Orion seemed deliberately arranged, as if some divine hand had etched it across the heavens. The question is why this one constellation, out of all the millions in the sky, came to embody gods, heroes, and warnings in cultures separated by oceans and millennia. In ancient Egypt, Orion was far more than a hunter in the sky. To them, it was the embodiment of Osiris, the god of death, resurrection, and eternal life. The alignment of Orion rising on the horizon marked not just the turning of seasons, but the cycle of life and rebirth itself. When a pharaoh died, his soul was believed to ascend toward the stars of Orion, joining Osiris in the afterlife. The pyramid texts, some of the oldest surviving religious writings in the world, speak repeatedly of the king becoming one with Orion, sailing on a celestial bark across the heavens. The imagery is rich and poetic, but many researchers argue that behind this poetry lies precise astronomical observation. The pharaoh was not only becoming Osiris in a symbolic sense. His soul was imagined to literally travel to a specific cluster of stars. For a culture so preoccupied with eternity, the placement of monuments on Earth to mirror the heavens was no random act. It was a deliberate bridging of realms. But Egypt was far from alone. Across the Mediterranean, the Greeks saw Orion as a mighty hunter, a giant striding the heavens with his club and bow. He was fearless, chasing after the Pleiades, and eventually slain by a scorpion. His myth is one of hubris and downfall, but even in this, scholars see encoded astronomical meaning. The constellation of Scorpius indeed rises as Orion sets, an eternal chase written across the sky. To the Greeks, Orion became a lesson in humility, yet also reaffirmed the role of the stars as storytellers of cosmic cycles. The hunter is brought down, only to rise again each night. Death, pursuit, and rebirth, echoing the same themes found in Egypt, though clothed in different mythology. Farther east, in Mesopotamia, Orion was known as the Great Shepherd, or sometimes connected with the celestial figure Gilgamesh, who likewise hunted lions and sought immortality. In Indian traditions, The three stars of the belt were seen as the doorway to the heavens, gateways through which souls or deities could move. In China, the constellation was recognized as part of the White Tiger of the West, a guardian figure representing strength and cosmic balance. In Mesoamerica, among the Maya and Aztec, Orion's belt and the nearby nebulae were associated with the cosmic hearth, the very place where the gods first lit the fire of creation. To sit before a hearth is to remember the beginning of the world, and so the belt of Orion became a celestial fireplace, the spark that birthed time. What unites all these interpretations is not uniformity, but persistence. The same three stars echo across civilizations with no direct contact, always carrying weight far beyond their simple appearance. This suggests either a universal psychological pull towards symmetry in the sky, or, as many alternative researchers argue, the remnants of a much older, global tradition of star watching. Could it be that Orion was singled out in prehistory, taught to migrating peoples, and preserved in myth wherever humans settled? The possibility lingers like a shadow behind every myth. Mainstream historians prefer to frame this convergence as coincidence or as the natural result of Orion's visibility. Yet coincidences begin to strain when one looks at the monuments. The Giza pyramids, for example, appear to replicate the arrangement of Orion's belt, tilted slightly, offset in size, yet proportionally consistent. This correlation, first popularized by Robert Bauval in the 1990s, sparked fierce debate. Was this a deliberate attempt by ancient builders to mirror the heavens? Or was it the human brain projecting patterns where none were intended? Detractors argue that given enough stars and enough monuments, patterns will always emerge. Supporters counter that the precision, timing, and symbolic importance of Osiris in Egyptian religion make the alignment far too intentional to dismiss. The debate reveals more than just a disagreement about pyramids. It exposes a fundamental clash between two worldviews. One sees ancient peoples as brilliant but ultimately limited builders, creating monuments for political or religious purposes without deeper scientific intent. The other views them as custodians of a profound, perhaps inherited, cosmic knowledge, aligning stone with star not merely to impress, but to encode. When myths describe Orion as a hunter, a god, or a hearth, perhaps they're not simply telling stories. Perhaps they are pointing to cycles, to disasters, to astronomical alignments that herald changes in human fate. Consider the Egyptian belief that Orion was the destination of kings. If this was purely metaphorical, why would entire monuments be aligned toward the belt stars? Why not toward other bright stars like Sirius, Aldebaran, or Vega? The emphasis on Orion specifically suggests a priority, a message intended to endure. And endurance is what monuments provide. Messages written in stone, meant to survive the fall of civilizations. Could it be that in mapping Orion onto Earth, the builders were ensuring that future generations would never lose sight of its importance? Even in modern times, Orion remains one of the most recognized constellations in the sky. Children learn to spot it with ease, sailors have navigated by it, and astronomers still marvel at the Orion Nebula, a vast stellar nursery where stars are born. There is an uncanny poetry in knowing that the very constellation so revered by the ancients is also, scientifically, a place of creation. To the Egyptians, Osiris embodied resurrection, and modern astrophysics shows Orion as a literal birthplace of stars. Myth and science, once again, converge in ways that hint at deeper truths. When we weave together these global myths and monumental alignments, a picture forms. Orion was not simply admired, it was central. It became a bridge between earth and sky, between mortal life and divine eternity, between mythic story and cosmic event. If monuments mirror the belt stars, and myths encode warnings of cosmic cycles, then perhaps Orion was not chosen for beauty alone. Perhaps it was chosen as a marker, a reminder, and a warning. Its monuments on Earth stand as frozen reflections of a cosmic pattern, one that might one day shift in ways that bring disaster. And so, from Mesopotamia to Mexico, from an Nile to the Aegean, Orion's belt stands not just as 3 points of light, but as a universal anchor in human consciousness. It is a monument of the sky, echoed by monuments of stone, carrying forward a message we are only beginning to decipher. The desert of Giza stretches out like an ocean of sand, and from its horizon rise 3 massive structures that have confounded scholars, mystics, and dreamers for thousands of years. The Great Pyramids of Egypt stand not merely as tombs or monuments, but as silent enigmas, vast stone equations carved into the earth. Their sheer scale, the precision of their alignments, and their endurance through ages of shifting sands make them something far more than simple markers of human ambition. They seem to whisper of another purpose, one tied not only to Earth but to the stars above. For centuries, mainstream Egyptology has insisted that the pyramids were built primarily as tombs for pharaohs, eternal houses meant to preserve the bodies of kings and the wealth that would accompany them into the afterlife. And yet, inside the Great Pyramid of Khufu, no body was ever found. No inscriptions announce a royal burial. The internal passages are oddly complex, angled in deliberate ways that seem to point to the heavens rather than the rituals of death. This absence of conventional tomb evidence has opened the door to more radical interpretations, and among them, one idea towers above the rest, that the pyramids were designed as a star map, a monumental mirror of Orion's belt. Standing at night before the pyramids, the comparison is unavoidable. Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, the 3 great pyramids of Giza, are arranged in a slightly offset line, just as the 3 stars of Orion's belt are. Not only the positioning, but the proportional sizes seem to match, with the smallest pyramid corresponding to the dimmest star. The Nile itself runs close to the plateau, mirroring the Milky Way as though Earth and sky had been fused into one great reflection. Was this merely coincidence? Or was it the work of a civilization determined to encode the heavens into their very landscape? Supporters of the Orion correlation theory argue that this alignment is far too deliberate to dismiss. They point out that the pyramids are aligned almost perfectly to the cardinal directions, with astonishing precision for a culture supposedly lacking advanced instruments. The shafts within the Great Pyramid, often dismissed as simple ventilation, line up with key stars, most notably Orion's belt and Sirius, the dog star sacred to the goddess Isis. These alignments would have had little meaning for airflow, but enormous significance if the purpose was to connect the pharaoh's spirit with the gods in the sky. The entire structure begins to look less like a tomb and more like a machine, a stone-built instrument of resurrection and celestial connection. And yet, the pyramid is more than a mirror of the stars. Its geometry hides secrets that continue to baffle modern architects and mathematicians. The ratio of its base to its height approximates the mathematical constant pi. The perimeter of its base divided by its height gives a near-perfect approximation of 2 pi, as though the builders encoded not only the heavens, but the very language of mathematics into stone. If this was the work of chance, it is a chance repeated with uncanny precision. If intentional, then the builders possessed a knowledge far beyond what orthodox history grants them. Mainstream scholars push back against these ideas, insisting that the alignments are exaggerated, the mathematics overstated, the symbolism misunderstood. They argue that Egyptians were extraordinary engineers, but still rooted in the needs of their time: burial, ritual, and the reinforcement of divine kingship. And yet, this argument does not explain why the builders chose such exact astronomical orientations, nor why the pyramid's passages point with such care toward Orion and other stars. Why would a tomb need to align itself with celestial markers unless those markers carried vital meaning? When we step away from the academic debate and simply stand in the desert, looking at the pyramids beneath a star-filled sky, the impression is overwhelming. These were not haphazard constructions. They were deliberate statements, architectural prayers carved into stone, linking earth to heaven. To the Egyptians, Osiris, as Orion, was the god of eternal return, of death that was not final but a doorway to rebirth. By anchoring their monuments to his stars, they were not just preserving their kings, they were inscribing the promise of resurrection into the very bones of the world. But there is a darker possibility. What if the pyramids were not merely symbolic bridges, but warnings, stone-coded messages pointing to cycles of catastrophe? Some researchers suggest that the Egyptians, and perhaps even earlier cultures, possessed knowledge of cosmic cycles, impacts, floods, or shifts that repeated over long spans of time. By encoding Orion into their monuments, they may have been pointing to the sky as a cosmic clock, reminding future generations to watch for alignments that herald disaster. In this view, the pyramids are not simply memorials to the dead but survival guides for the living. The sense of deliberate design becomes even more haunting when one considers how the pyramids have survived. Empires rose and fell, sands buried cities, yet these structures remained, vast and immovable, as if intended to endure until the present age. If the builders wished to send a message through time, what better way than through stone mountains visible from miles away, aligned to a constellation that never fails to rise? The pyramids are not simply history, they are communication. It is this possibility that unnerves mainstream scholarship. If true, it means the Egyptians, or perhaps a culture older than Egypt, had knowledge of the cosmos and its cycles that modern humanity is only beginning to rediscover. It would imply that history, as we know, is incomplete, that civilization is not a steady ascent from primitive to advanced, but a cycle of rises and collapses, with knowledge preserved in fragments, hidden in myths, or locked into monuments like the pyramids. Whether as tombs, resurrection machines, or cosmic warnings, the pyramids force us to reconsider our assumptions about the past. They are too precise, too immense, too enduring to dismiss as mere royal vanity. They speak to us in geometry, in alignment, in silence. They suggest that the ancients saw the world not as a separate realm from the heavens, but as a mirror of it, a place where gods walked and where stone could be shaped to echo the eternal dance of the stars. And always, Orion hovers above, the celestial figure mirror below. A hunter, a god, a warning sign etched across the desert. Whether one sees coincidence or design, the effect is the same. The pyramids of Giza transform the landscape into a reflection of the sky, binding humanity to the cosmos, tying Earth's destiny to the eternal rhythm of the stars. In that geometry, in that silence, the ancients may have left us a message. The question is whether we are ready to understand it. In the dim chambers of ancient temples, carved into stone and painted onto plastered ceilings, fragments of a lost language remain. Not a language of letters or words, but of stars, spirals, and symbols that speak to the night sky. Across the ruins of Egypt and beyond, there are maps, cosmic diagrams that seem to chart not only the heavens of the past, but patterns that stretch into the future. They are not laid out like modern star charts, precise and numerical, but encoded in mythic forms, gods entangled with constellations, animals spiraling across circular zodiacs, rivers mirrored in the Milky Way. These maps are scattered like broken pieces of a puzzle, hidden in plain sight, waiting for those who look past the surface to recognize their deeper meaning. One of the most mysterious of these relics is the Dendera zodiac, discovered on the ceiling of a chapel at the Temple of Hathor. At first glance, it appears to be a simple astrological chart, figures of gods and animals encircling the central disk. But on closer examination, scholars and seekers alike noticed something extraordinary. It depicts the stars and constellations in arrangements that some argue reflect specific celestial events, moments in time preserved forever in stone. Conventional Egyptologists see it as a ceremonial design, symbolic of cosmic order, but others argue it is far more sophisticated, a map that encoded astronomical cycles, eclipses, and perhaps even records of catastrophic alignments. If so, The priests of Dendera were not merely decorating their temple. They were archiving star knowledge with precision that rivals, and in some ways surpasses, our own. The Dendera zodiac is not alone. Tombs in the Valley of the Kings and sacred chambers at Abydos display similar star charts, ceilings painted with constellations and star figures arranged with deliberate care. In these murals, we see not only Orion but a procession of other constellations, deities sailing in boats across rivers of stars, and figures reaching towards symbols of rebirth. They may appear to modern eyes as mythic scenes, but to the initiated, they may have been instructional, maps of the heavens to guide both the soul of the dead and the living priesthood who guarded cosmic knowledge. When ancient Egyptians looked to the sky, they did not separate the sacred from the scientific. The stars were both gods and navigational markers, signs of destiny and precise indicators of time. Their temples and tombs reflect this unity, and their walls may preserve knowledge we have only begun to interpret. The danger, however, lies in assuming these were merely decorative. When aligned with actual sky maps, the figures often match celestial positions, sometimes dating to specific eras. Some researchers suggest that these murals are not simply religious art, but coded astronomical records, archives of past events, perhaps warnings of disasters tied to the cycles of the stars. Skeptics dismiss these interpretations, pointing out that mythic imagery is too flexible, too symbolic to pin to precise astronomy. Yet it is difficult to ignore how many ancient sites carry similar motifs. The 7 stars of the Pleiades appear again and again, as do spirals that resemble solar eclipses or cometary paths. In cave art in Europe dating back 15,000 years, some researchers claim the same constellations are depicted, suggesting a tradition of star mapping older than recorded history. If this is true, then the Egyptians were inheritors of a knowledge already ancient, and the maps they left us were not inventions, but transmissions of an older, possibly global system of skywatching. Consider the possibility that these maps encoded not only the positions of stars, but cycles of destruction. Ancient myths are filled with floods, fires from the sky, and dark ages brought on by celestial upheaval. If certain alignments corresponded with cometary showers, meteor impacts, or sudden climate shifts, then to record these patterns would be to preserve a kind of survival manual. Perhaps the Dendera zodiac and its kin are less about worship and more about warning, an attempt to freeze in time the memory of catastrophe, so that future generations could prepare. The problem is that over time, the original scientific intent may have blurred into myth, leaving only fragments of meaning accessible to us today. Modern astronomy lends some weight to this theory. We know that Earth passes through cycles of cometary debris, that impacts and solar storms have periodically ravaged our planet. If the ancients had centuries, even millennia, to observe the sky, they may have recognized patterns invisible to us within a single lifetime. Imagine a priesthood watching Orion rise year after year, noting when floods came, when drought struck, when the heavens sent fire. Over generations, the pattern might become undeniable, recorded not in written equations, but in carved star maps, mythologized yet exact in their symbolism. The suppression of this interpretation is telling. In the 19th century, when the Dendera zodiac was first removed and studied, it sparked enormous controversy. Some claimed it dated back far earlier than mainstream chronology allowed, even tens of thousands of years. Such claims were quickly dismissed, not only because they challenged Egypt's historical timeline, but because they suggested a level of astronomical sophistication inconvenient to the narrative of human progress. The zodiac was reclassified as symbolic, religious, decorative, anything but scientific. And yet, its quiet power remains. Artifacts like these raise uncomfortable questions. What if much of ancient architecture, art, and myth are actually parts of an immense code? What if temples were observatories disguised as sanctuaries, murals calendars hidden in mythic garb, zodiacs warnings to civilizations not yet born? The fragments scattered across Egypt, Mesopotamia, and beyond suggest a system that is larger than any single culture. It hints at a forgotten chapter of human knowledge, a time when the heavens were not merely admired but read like a book, its warnings etched into stone for those willing to look closely. To wander the halls of these ancient temples is to step into a library where the shelves are the ceilings and the books are the stars themselves. We stand beneath painted constellations, often gazing with touristic wonder. But for the ancients, these were not curiosities. They were instructions. They were survival. And somewhere within the spirals and star figures, within the deliberate geometry of murals and zodiacs, there may be a record of disasters yet to come. Hidden in plain sight, these maps may hold the keys to understanding not only what destroyed past civilizations, but what may threaten our own. For every civilization that rises, there are always those who guard its deepest secrets, knowledge too dangerous or too sacred to be shared freely. In Egypt, the priests of the temples were more than servants of the gods. They were astronomers, mathematicians, and keepers of mysteries. They knew when a Nile would flood by watching the stars. They timed their rituals to align with celestial events, and they preserved cycles of the heavens in chants and carvings that most common people would never fully understand. To the average farmer, the rising of Sirius simply meant the river would swell. To the priesthood, it was a reminder that heaven and earth were bound together by patterns that stretched across millennia. They were custodians of a cosmic code. The question is whether this priestly guardianship ended with Egypt's decline, or whether fragments of this knowledge were carried forward in secret, passed from one hidden brotherhood to another, protected like embers of a great fire waiting to be rekindled. Alternative historians argue that what we call secret societies, the mystery schools of Greece, the initiates of Rome, the esoteric sects of the Middle Ages, even the Freemasons and Rosicrucians of modern times, are not disconnected phenomena, but branches of a single tree. At its root lies Egypt, and beneath Egypt lies something older still. The Egyptians were famous for their initiations. Not everyone could enter the innermost chambers of temples. Not everyone could gaze upon the sacred texts or learn the true meanings of the myths. Candidates were tested, often through symbolic journeys of death and rebirth, symbolic drownings, or nights spent in tomb-like chambers to confront the underworld. Only those who survived with courage and clarity were admitted into higher orders of knowledge. It is said these initiates were shown not only the sacred geometry of the temples, but the geometry of the stars, instructed in how monuments mirrored Orion, Sirius, and the great cycles of the cosmos. Knowledge was power, and power demanded secrecy. When Greece rose to prominence, echoes of this system appeared in their mystery schools, Eleusis, Orphic rites, and later Platonic philosophy. Greek thinkers such as Pythagoras and Plato traveled to Egypt, seeking wisdom at the feet of priests. They returned with strange teachings of harmony, number, and cosmic order that shaped Western thought for centuries. Behind the veil of philosophy lay fragments of Egyptian cosmology, stripped of its overt gods but still infused with the belief that the universe was ordered, cyclical, and mathematical. The guardianship had shifted from temple to academy, but the essence remained. In Rome, mystery cults flourished. Mithraism, with its imagery of a bull slain beneath the stars, is often interpreted as an astronomical code, a myth dramatizing the precession of the equinoxes, the shifting of ages across the zodiac. Again, the theme emerges: secret groups encoding celestial patterns, preserving knowledge of cycles too immense for a single lifetime. While the masses worshipped openly, the initiates watched the stars. As empires fell and the world darkened into the Middle Ages, the flame of ancient knowledge did not vanish. Instead, it flickered in hidden chambers. Alchemists who spoke of transformation not only of metals but of the soul, mystics who mapped the heavens as inner as well as outer landscapes, builders who left subtle symbols in cathedrals. The great Gothic churches of Europe, aligned to solstices and filled with astronomical symbolism, are often seen as Christian triumphs. But beneath their carvings lie echoes of older traditions, geometry, and proportion borrowed from Egypt and Greece, whispered through the hands of guilds that would one day be called Freemasons. Freemasonry itself has long been linked to the preservation of ancient secrets. Its rituals speak of lost words, hidden temples, and the search for a master's knowledge buried beneath layers of time. While modern Masonry is often dismissed as social fraternity, its symbols tell another story: the square and compass, the all-seeing eye, the unfinished pyramid. These are not random emblems. They are echoes of the geometry of the gods, the cosmic maps once drawn in stone on the Giza plateau. Some suggest that within the higher degrees of Masonry, initiates are still instructed, obliquely, symbolically, in the mysteries of the stars. The pyramid, after all, is not just an Egyptian monument. It has become the universal emblem of hidden wisdom. Parallel to Masonry, the Rosicrucians emerged in the 17th century, claiming secret enlightenment, ancient roots, and hidden knowledge of nature and the cosmos. Their manifestos spoke of cycles, prophecies, and a plan for humanity guided by those who understood the stars. Even if much of it was allegory, the resonance is clear: a brotherhood preserving knowledge through secrecy, hinting that they hold fragments of a cosmic code too powerful for the uninitiated. Skeptics argue that these societies merely borrowed symbolism for dramatic effect, weaving myths of Egypt and Orion into rituals without substance. But if we trace the continuity, the priesthoods of Egypt, the mystery schools of Greece, the initiations of Rome, the guilds of medieval builders, the esoteric orders of the Renaissance, the pattern suggests more than coincidence. It suggests a current of knowledge flowing beneath the surface of history, sometimes swelling into influence, sometimes hidden, but never extinguished. And what is the nature of this knowledge? At its heart, it appears to be a recognition of cycles, the rising and falling of stars, the alignment of heavens with earth, the recurrence of catastrophe and renewal. To know the cycles was to foresee the floods, the famines, perhaps even the disasters that struck civilizations down. Such knowledge, if true, will be both a gift and a burden. Shared widely, it could cause panic or chaos. Guarded carefully, it could give power to those who held it. Thus the need for guardians, esoteric orders that concealed while they preserved. Even today, whispers of this hidden stream persist. Conspiracy theories abound of elite groups who still align their symbols with Orion, who mark global events with star dates, who preserve an ancient code about future catastrophes. Whether truth or imagination, the symbolism continues, embedded on the dollar bill, hidden in architecture, lurking in rituals. Perhaps the orders no longer understand the full meaning of what they carry. Perhaps the chain has broken, leaving them with fragments of a code without its key. Or perhaps the guardianship is alive and deliberate, waiting for the next great alignment when the knowledge will again become vital. To walk through history with this lens is unsettling. What seems random becomes connected. What seems symbolic becomes literal. Egyptian priests watching the sky, Greek philosophers speaking of harmony, Roman cults dramatizing the heavens, medieval masons carving geometry into cathedrals, modern fraternities swearing oaths before pyramids. All of them may be expressions of a single thread of guardianship, a code written in the stars, hidden in monuments, preserved in symbols. The guardians may have changed their names, their languages, their outward faiths, but the essence of their task remained: to protect the celestial code, to ensure it survives until the world needs it again. And perhaps that time is now. Across the expanse of human history, stories of sudden catastrophe ripple through myth and legend like recurring echoes of a trauma too vast to be forgotten. Floods that swallowed cities, fires that rained from the heavens, plagues of darkness, and winters that stretched unnaturally long. These tales appear in the records of every ancient culture. For the mainstream historian, they are metaphors, moral lessons, or exaggerations woven into myth. Yet to those who look closer, they may represent something more unsettling. Eyewitness accounts of cosmic disasters, events triggered not randomly, but in rhythm with the stars. And among the stars, none appears more ominously tied to these patterns than Orion. In Egypt, Orion was Osiris, the god of rebirth, but rebirth presupposes death. The cycle of renewal requires destruction before creation. The pyramid texts and later coffin texts repeatedly describe a great flood and a darkening of the heavens, cosmic upheavals through which Osiris passes before returning to bring order once more. Was this mythic allegory? Or was Orion associated directly with cycles of disaster? Floods that devastated the Nile Valley, comet showers that burned across the atmosphere, or other celestial events that ancient priests encoded in their stories. Consider the Great Flood myth itself, one of the most universal stories in human memory. From Mesopotamia's Epic of Gilgamesh to the biblical story of Noah, from India's Tale of Manu to the flood legends of Mesoamerica, we see a consistent theme. Humanity is nearly extinguished by waters unleashed from above or below, with only a few survivors preserved to begin again. While geology and climate science recognize that massive floods and sea level rises did occur in the distant past, the astonishing question is whether the timing of these disasters was observed and recorded in the sky. Some researchers point to evidence of comet impacts around 10,800 BCE, triggering what is known as the Younger Dryas, a sudden plunge into Ice Age conditions. Could it be that ancient peoples connected such disasters with alignments of Orion, encoding the constellation as both the god of rebirth and the celestial harbinger of catastrophe? If we look closely at the sky, Orion occupies a critical place. It sits along the celestial equator, visible from nearly every inhabited land on Earth. Its annual rising and setting mark important seasonal thresholds. But more than this, its surrounding region is astronomically active. The Orion molecular cloud complex is one of the most active star-forming regions in the galaxy, home to massive nebulae, supernova remnants, and stars that flare and fade. To the ancients, these shifting lights may have signaled instability, warnings of a violent universe. To us today, with telescopes peering deeper, we recognize the Orion region as one of cosmic turbulence. It is no wonder ancient people saw it as both sacred and threatening. Egyptian texts sometimes describe the heavens opening, the stars falling, the earth trembling. The Mayans spoke of repeated suns or world ages destroyed by fire, flood, and darkness, each one renewed under the guidance of celestial cycles. The Greeks recorded stories of Phaeton, the son of the sun god, who lost control of the chariot of the sun and set the earth ablaze before being struck down. These myths, scattered across time and geography, share a haunting similarity. They describe catastrophes of cosmic scale tied to the order of the heavens. If Orion, as some argue, served as a celestial clock, then perhaps these disasters were not random. Perhaps they were expected, recurring on cycles too vast for an individual to observe, but clear to civilizations who measured the stars for generations. Skeptics argue that linking Orion to catastrophe stretches evidence too far, but the coincidences remain provocative. Alignments of Orion's belt with key monuments, correlations of myths across cultures, and geological evidence of sudden disasters all seem to converge. The possibility arises that Orion's role as Osiris, as rebirth, encoded not only spiritual resurrection, but literal survival after cataclysm. The pyramids, aligned to Orion, may have served as anchors of memory, telling future ages, "Watch the hunter in the sky, for when his belt aligns, the world changes." Even modern science gives pause. Studies of impact cycles suggest that Earth experiences peaks in cometary bombardment at regular intervals, possibly tied to the orbit of long-period comets or perturbations from the Oort cloud. If the ancients recognized these cycles, not through modern astrophysics, but through centuries of observation, they may have enshrined the knowledge in their myths and monuments. To call Orion a warning, then, is not poetic speculation, but a possible recognition that cosmic danger is written in recurring patterns. Imagine a priest standing on the Giza plateau, watching the belt of Orion rise perfectly above the horizon. To him, it was not only Osiris ascending. It was a reminder of past floods, past fires, past darkness, stories passed down from generations before him. His duty was to preserve the memory, to encode it in ritual, to inscribe it on walls, so that when the cycle came again, humanity would not be caught unaware. And yet, over centuries, memory faded into myth, myth into story, story into religion. The warning remained, but its meaning grew obscure. This blurring of memory and myth is perhaps why Orion still captivates us today. On some level, humanity remembers. We look at those three stars and feel their importance without knowing why. Our ancestors may have watched them with a mix of reverence and dread, recognizing not only the beauty of the heavens, but the terror that the heavens could unleash. To us, Orion is still the hunter, the warrior, the god of resurrection. But beneath those symbols may lie an older truth. Orion is the clock, and catastrophe is the hour it measures. The modern world, for all its science and technology, is not immune to the cycles of nature. Comets still cross our skies, earthquakes still shake the ground, and climate still shifts in ways we struggle to predict. If the ancients encoded their knowledge of these patterns into Orion, then perhaps they left us a gift we have yet to fully recognize. The warning is still there, written in stone and myth, waiting for us to decode it before the cycle turns once more. And so, when we gaze up at Orion on a clear winter's night, we are not only looking at stars. We are staring into the same cosmic face that guided the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Mayans, and countless others. They saw in it the story of gods, of rebirth, of disaster and survival. They aligned their temples and pyramids to its belt, carved its image into their myths, and wove its movements into their prophecies. We, too, stand beneath it, inheritors of their memory, though we may not yet grasp its meaning. Perhaps the true catastrophe is not only in the floods or fires to come, but in forgetting the warnings left for us in the sky. History, we are told, is a collection of facts, kings and dynasties, wars and treaties, inventions and discoveries. But behind that neat scaffolding, another story lurks, one of omission, censorship, and deliberate forgetting. It is a tale of knowledge suppressed, of insights considered too dangerous or destabilizing for the masses, and of secrets that move in shadows while textbooks shine only on the surface. Nowhere does this tension between mainstream history and hidden mysteries become more obvious than in the debate surrounding Egypt, Orion, and the possibility of ancient cosmic maps. When archaeologists first uncovered the wonders of Giza in the 19th century, they insisted these monuments were simply tombs, grand structures built by ambitious pharaohs to glorify themselves. The pyramids, they claimed, contained nothing more mystical than chambers for the dead and stolen treasures long since plundered. The hieroglyphs, the art, the mythology, these were interpreted as quaint cultural expressions, nothing more. But from the very beginning, there were dissenters. Explorers, scholars, and mystics alike pointed to alignments of the pyramids with the stars, the strange precision of their proportions, and the echoes of cosmic cycles in Egyptian texts. They asked the question mainstream Egyptology has always resisted. What if the pyramids are not only tombs, but messages, markers in stone encoding astronomical warnings? The academic establishment recoiled from such suggestions, labeling them pseudo-archaeology. For them, history had to remain orderly, explainable within human ambition and simple technology. To admit that Egypt might have preserved knowledge of cosmic cycles, or that Orion's belt was purposefully mirrored on the desert floor, would open a floodgate of uncomfortable questions. How did they know such things without telescopes? Why would they care so much to align their lives with the stars? And what if their myths, instead of being fanciful stories, were encoded memories of real events? Events that challenge the official timeline of human progress. The tension between mainstream history and esoteric interpretation is not just academic. It is ideological. If civilizations in the distant past possessed advanced astronomical knowledge, then the neat evolutionary ladder of history, hunter-gatherers to farmers, farmers to city-states, city-states to empires, collapses. It suggests forgotten epochs, lost sciences, perhaps even cycles of human rise and fall far older than textbooks allow. And with that suggestion comes danger. The authority of modern institutions begins to wobble. After all, if ancient priests could foresee disaster by watching Orion, what does that say about our current ability to predict or control the future? If they left warnings for us, why are those warnings not part of our education today? One of the most striking examples of suppression lies in how myths are treated. To the mainstream, myths are allegories, primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena. Thunder is Zeus's anger. The flood is punishment for sin. The sun is a chariot across the sky. But to mystery traditions, myths are not childish stories, but complex codes. Every symbol hides layered meanings. Every god is a planet or star. Every epic retells not only spiritual truths but historical events. For example, the story of Osiris's death and resurrection is read by many as a celestial allegory of Orion's setting and rising, but also as a record of catastrophe and renewal. When mainstream historians strip these myths of their deeper context, they reduce cosmic memory to folklore, cutting us off from what may be warnings written in the only language available to ancient people: symbolism. Suppression also appears in archaeology itself. Discoveries that challenge the accepted narrative are often ignored or reinterpreted to fit the model. Consider the erosion patterns on the Sphinx, which some geologists argue indicate water damage thousands of years older than the official construction date. If true, it would place the Sphinx in a time before dynastic Egypt, perhaps even connected to the cataclysms of the Younger Dryas. Yet the mainstream resists, preferring the safer story that it was carved during the reign of Khafre around 2500 BCE. To admit otherwise would link Egypt directly with forgotten ages of global disaster, and revive the uncomfortable idea that monuments like the Sphinx and pyramids are not only works of architecture, but markers of catastrophe. There's also the strange silence around alignment theories. Even when computer models show that the three Great Pyramids of Giza match the belt stars of Orion around 10,500 BCE, mainstream Egyptologists dismiss it as coincidence. They argue that Egyptians could not possibly have been concerned with star alignments so precise. Yet the same historians acknowledge that Egyptians meticulously tracked Sirius to time their calendar and rituals. Why then is it so unthinkable that they encoded Orion into their monuments? The answer may lie not in lack of evidence, but in fear of consequence. To accept the alignment is to acknowledge a forgotten layer of knowledge, and with it the possibility that history is not linear progress but cyclical memory. And yet, outside of academia, the suppressed narrative thrives. Alternative historians, esoteric researchers, and mystery traditions keep alive the idea that the ancients were warning us of cosmic danger. They are often mocked, their work dismissed as conspiracy or pseudoscience, but they continue to draw massive audiences. Why? Because people sense that something is missing in the mainstream story. The precision of the pyramids, the universal flood myths, the recurring symbolism of Orion across cultures, it all feels too interconnected to be mere chance. Suppression breeds curiosity, and curiosity becomes a movement of its own. The pattern of suppression is not unique to Egypt. Throughout history, knowledge that threatens established power has often been concealed. The Catholic Church restricted astronomical inquiry that contradicted doctrine. The Library of Alexandria, whether destroyed by accident or intent, represents a catastrophic erasure of ancient learning. Secret societies preserve geometry, alchemy, and celestial codes in ritual form precisely because open transmission would have been met with hostility. We live today in a world that prides itself on science and transparency, but even now, data about near-Earth asteroids, solar activity, or long-term climate cycles is not always shared openly with the public. Fear of panic, fear of destabilization, fear of losing control. These motives remain as powerful today as they were in ancient times. Suppressed knowledge is never truly destroyed. It moves underground into whispers, symbols, and stories. The guardians of mystery traditions understood this. If they could not publish openly, they encoded in architecture, in ritual, in allegory. And so, what mainstream history calls superstition may in fact be survival. The only way to pass along knowledge when open speech is impossible. The pyramids, the myths, the alignments. These may not be puzzles created for curiosity's sake, but codes left because they could not be spoken plainly. The real tragedy is that suppression blinds us not only to the past, but to the future. If Orion encodes cycles of catastrophe, then ignoring the message leaves us vulnerable. Perhaps we stand on the threshold of another alignment, another turning of the cosmic wheel, without even realizing it. The ancients may have tried to tell us, but the gatekeepers of history decided it was myth, coincidence, or nonsense. And so, the warnings remain buried, just as the monuments are half buried in sand. In the end, the struggle between mainstream history and mystery tradition is not simply about facts. It is about worldview. Do we live in a random universe where myths are fairy tales and monuments are vanity projects? Or do we live in a patterned cosmos where the stars themselves write history and where our ancestors tried desperately to pass on knowledge of cycles we have forgotten? The choice of interpretation changes everything. Mainstream history keeps us comfortable. Mystery history makes us uneasy. And yet, perhaps it is only in that unease, in acknowledging what was suppressed, that we can prepare for what is still to come. Across deserts, mountains, and seas, the ancient world spoke in prophecies. They were not simply fortune-telling tricks or poetic metaphors. To the cultures who uttered them, prophecies were lifelines, messages carried forward to guide generations not yet born. Some were inscribed in stone, others preserved in chants and epic poems, and many were whispered through priestly lineages, veiled in allegory, so only the initiated could decode them. Beneath the surface, one theme seems to rise again and again. The stars hold the map of the future, and among them Orion reigns as a celestial signpost for both disaster and renewal. Egypt's connection to prophecy is perhaps the most striking. The priesthood of Heliopolis, guardians of the so-called House of Life, were said to possess scrolls and star charts that detailed not only past ages, but cycles yet to come. In the coffin texts and pyramid texts, passages speak of the sky opening, floods overwhelming the land, and stars falling like fiery serpents. To a casual reader, these verses sound mythic, but to the initiated, they might have been warnings encoded in ritual. The alignment of Orion, the rising of Sirius, the turning of the heavens, all of these were celestial markers, each linked to events on Earth. Egyptian prophecy was not about predicting individual fates, but about charting the fate of civilizations through cosmic cycles. Beyond the Nile, we find echoes of the same star lore. In Mesopotamia, priests of Babylon and Sumer watched the skies obsessively, developing some of the earliest forms of astrology. Their records contain omens tied to eclipses, conjunctions, and alignments of constellations. Orion, known to them as Sapatsiana, appears frequently in these star lists, often linked with judgment or divine intervention. The Enuma Anu Enlil, a collection of thousands of omens on clay tablets, suggests that the appearance of Orion could foretell upheavals, wars, or natural catastrophes. For the Mesopotamians, prophecy was astronomy wrapped in divinity. The gods spoke through the stars, and the future could be glimpsed by those who knew how to listen. Greek tradition inherited much of this mindset, though clothed in philosophy and epic poetry. Oracles like those at Delphi spoke in riddles, but behind their enigmatic words lay celestial timing. Scholars have noted that many major prophecies delivered at Delphi coincided with unusual astronomical events, alignments, eclipses, or heliacal risings of key stars. Plato himself hinted at cycles of destruction, describing in the Timaeus and Critias a great flood that struck Athens long before recorded history, leaving only fragments of memory. He attributed this knowledge to the priests of Egypt, who told Solon that humanity forgets its past because fire and flood periodically erase civilization. Was this not a prophecy in itself, that catastrophe would come again, that the cycle repeats, and that only by reading the stars could humanity prepare? Across the ocean, the Mayans and Aztecs developed intricate calendars, not merely to track days, but to anticipate world ages. The Mayan long count did not end in 2012, as popular sensationalism suggested, but rather marked the completion of a vast cycle, one they believed was tied to cosmic rhythms. Their myths describe previous worlds destroyed by flood, fire, and jaguars descending from the sky. Once again, the heavens and prophecy intertwine. Orion, known in Mesoamerican tradition as the fire drill or hearth of the sky, was central to their rituals. The three stars of Orion's belt formed the sacred hearthstones of creation, and their movement signaled new epochs. The Aztec New Fire ceremony, held every 52 years, involved watching Orion to ensure the cosmos would renew itself. Failure of the constellation to rise as expected would mean the end of the world. Here, prophecy was not vague. It was astronomical precision, woven into the survival of the culture. In India, the Vedic texts are filled with references to cosmic cycles called yugas, vast spans of time through which humanity rises and falls. These cycles stretch for thousands of years, repeating endlessly, like great breaths of a universe. Orion appears in the Rig Veda as Prajapati, the lord of creation, who is pursued and destroyed only to be reborn. This myth is eerily similar to the Osiris cycle in Egypt, reinforcing the possibility that different civilizations encoded the same stellar drama in their prophecies. Indian seers did not merely predict individual events. They spoke of entire ages of light and darkness, prosperity and catastrophe, tied to the slow turning of the heavens. To them, prophecy was the reading of cosmic time, and the stars were the clock. What binds all these traditions together is the conviction that prophecy is not random guessing, but pattern recognition. When Orion rises at a certain angle, when Sirius returns to the dawn sky, when planets conjoin in rare formations, the world below shifts. Floods, plagues, invasions, each was thought to follow from cosmic timing. Modern astronomy calls these cycles precession, conjunction, or impact periodicity, but the ancients understood them in their own way. They translated astronomical data into myth and myth into prophecy, so the knowledge could be preserved across generations. Mainstream historians often dismiss these prophecies as superstition, but their universality demands attention. How could cultures so far apart, Egyptians, Mayans, Vedic Indians, arrive at similar systems of cosmic prediction unless they observed something real? Perhaps they remembered earlier disasters and sought patterns in the sky to prevent being caught off guard again. Perhaps they discovered, through centuries of watching, that the heavens do indeed mirror the fate of the earth. There is also the unsettling possibility that prophecies were not simply observations of cycles, but intentional warnings passed from a much older source. If a lost civilization, Atlantis as Plato hinted, or another unnamed precursor, suffered destruction from cosmic catastrophe, its survivors might have encoded their knowledge into myth and prophecy for the cultures that came after. Orion, with its bright and easily recognizable form, would serve as the perfect anchor for this message, a celestial marker that could not be forgotten. If so, then prophecy is less about foretelling than about remembering, a way of ensuring that the trauma of the past remains visible in the future. Even today, prophecies tied to the stars persist. Astrological traditions, though dismissed by science, still resonate with millions who feel that cosmic movements influence life on Earth. Apocalyptic predictions, whether religious or secular, often tie themselves to celestial events, blood moons, planetary alignments, solar eclipses. While modern society laughs at such claims, the very persistence of these ideas suggests a deep, ancient memory still alive in the collective psyche. We may not call it prophecy anymore, but the impulse is the same, to look to the heavens for signs of what is to come. And here lies the irony. With our telescopes and satellites, we know more about the mechanics of the cosmos than any ancient priest could dream of. We can track asteroids, model solar cycles, and measure distant supernovae. Yet we lack the mythic framework that gave meaning to these events. The ancients saw Orion as a god of rebirth and catastrophe. We see it as a stellar nursery and supernova remnant. But the warning may be the same. The sky is not silent. It is telling us, through cycles and alignments, that change is inevitable, that disasters are not if, but when. The ancients encoded this truth in prophecy. The question is whether we will listen. To dismiss prophecy as superstition is to strip away one of humanity's most profound survival tools. To honor it as cosmic memory is to reconnect with a tradition that stretches across millennia. In the star lore of Egypt, Babylon, Greece, India, and the Americas, we find not only myth but mathematics, not only poetry but pattern. And standing at the center of it all, bright in the night sky, is Orion, the eternal messenger, whose stars tell the same story to every culture that has ever looked up in wonder and fear. Perhaps the ancients did not predict the future. Perhaps they simply remembered the past so clearly that they saw it coming again. Geometry, to the ancients, was not a dry study of shapes, but the very language of creation. They believed the universe itself was woven through number, proportion, and harmony, that the patterns of the stars echoed in the dimensions of temples, and that what was built on earth could mirror what was written in heaven. Nowhere is this conviction more vividly embodied than in Egypt, where the pyramids rise like frozen rays of light from the desert floor, their angles and placements whispering of secrets older than dynasties. Beneath the stone lies a mathematical code, one that many believe links directly to Orion, and through Orion, to cycles of catastrophe and rebirth. The Great Pyramid of Giza is perhaps the most famous puzzle in stone. For centuries, scholars have measured its base, its height, its angles, and every chamber within, only to find patterns that defy simple explanation. The slope of its sides encodes the value of pi, long before it was formally calculated in Greece. Its dimensions hint at the golden ratio, phi, a proportion revered for its aesthetic and mystical significance. The perimeter of its base, compared to its height, corresponds almost exactly to the ratio of the Earth's circumference to its radius, as if the builders encoded planetary knowledge into a monument supposedly built by Bronze Age tools. Was this coincidence or deliberate design? The layout of the three main pyramids of Giza adds another layer to the mystery. Their placement on the ground mirrors, with uncanny accuracy, the three belt stars of Orion, Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka. The slight offset of the smallest pyramid corresponds to the faintest of the three stars, an asymmetry too precise to be accidental. Computer models show that this alignment matches the sky as it appeared around 10,500 BCE, a date far earlier than the conventional timeline of Egyptian civilization. Why would builders of 2,500 BCE align their monuments to a star pattern that matched the sky 8,000 years before their time? The question hangs like a riddle unsolved, suggesting either that they possessed knowledge of precession, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis, or that they were commemorating an epoch already ancient to them, perhaps the time of a great catastrophe that reset civilization. Sacred geometry is not confined to Giza. The temples of Egypt, from Karnak to Dendera, are filled with alignments, ratios, and proportions that echo cosmic order. The Temple of Hathor at Dendera contains the famous zodiac ceiling, showing constellations and planetary alignments in careful detail. To mainstream historians, this is a work of Hellenistic influence, but to alternative researchers, it represents the survival of a far older astronomical tradition. Orion, once again, takes center stage in these depictions, often paired with Sirius in a cosmic dance. The geometry of the temple is not only physical but celestial, mapping heaven onto stone so that rituals enacted within would harmonize with the great rhythms above. Sacred geometry was not unique to Egypt. Across the world, cultures seemed to share an obsession with certain numbers and ratios. The golden ratio, pi, the 3-4-5 triangle of Pythagoras. At Stonehenge, at Teotihuacan, at Angkor, what we find structures aligned to solstices, equinoxes, and constellations. Many of these sites show correlations with Orion, as though civilizations separated by oceans shared an unspoken code. Was this the result of independent discovery, or the remnants of a single ancient system disseminated long ago? The possibility that a lost civilization seeded the world with sacred geometry remains tantalizing, if controversial. Numbers themselves held mystical weight. To the Pythagoreans, geometry was the key to the cosmos. They spoke of the music of the spheres, the idea that planetary motions created harmonies. They revered the tetractys, a triangle of 10 points representing the unfolding of creation. Their ideas echo Egyptian thought, suggesting that knowledge flowed from the Nile to Greece, transformed into philosophy, but carrying the same essence. That to understand numbers was to understand the divine. Orion, with its straight belt and surrounding stars, lent itself naturally to geometric symbolism. Draw lines between its stars, and you find triangles, rectangles, and ratios that mirror the principles enshrined in temples and pyramids. The constellation itself became a teaching diagram in the sky. The ancients did not separate mathematics from spirituality. To them, geometry was sacred because it revealed the underlying order of existence. The Great Pyramid was a temple, a tomb, and a textbook in stone all at once. Its geometry taught the initiate how heaven and earth were bound together. Its alignment to Orion reminded the initiate of cycles of death and rebirth, catastrophe and renewal. In this sense, the pyramid was more than a monument. It was a library encoded in number, a message written for the future in a language that could not be erased by time. Critics argue that many of these correlations are coincidences, the human tendency to see patterns where none exist. They point out that with enough measurements, any shape can yield interesting ratios. But the consistency across cultures and monuments weakens that dismissal. When site after site, from Giza to Mexico to Cambodia, encodes similar numbers, similar proportions, and similar alignments with Orion, coincidence becomes a weak explanation. Instead, we are faced with the likelihood that ancient builders deliberately wove sacred geometry into their creations, guided by a worldview that saw the stars as inseparable from human destiny. The suppression of this idea, as discussed earlier, is telling. Modern academia insists on divorcing mathematics from myth, as though the two cannot coexist. Yet the ancients saw no division. Their myths described cosmic cycles, and their mathematics provided the framework for understanding them. Sacred geometry was the bridge between heaven and earth, Orion the emblem of its greatest cycle. If catastrophe was written in the stars, then geometry provided the means to mark it on the ground. What is perhaps most remarkable is that the code endures. Long after dynasties fell, long after priests and pharaohs were forgotten, the pyramids still stand. Their geometry still whispers the same proportions. Their alignments still point to Orion. We may debate their meaning, but the message itself has not vanished. If the builders intended to leave a warning or a guide, they succeeded. The monuments outlasted their civilization, carrying the code into our own age, daring us to decipher it. And so we stand today at a threshold. We can dismiss the geometry of Giza as coincidence, a byproduct of primitive ambition, or we can see it as what the ancients themselves believed it to be, sacred, deliberate, and profoundly connected to the stars. If we choose the latter, then we must ask what the code is trying to tell us. Is it a record of a past catastrophe, preserved so we would not forget? Is it a prophecy of cycles yet to come, urging us to watch Orion for signs of change? Or is it something even deeper, a key to harmonizing human life with cosmic order? Whatever the answer, the mathematical code remains one of history's greatest enigmas. The pyramids are not mute. Their stones speak in numbers, their alignments in stars. And at the heart of their message stands Orion, the eternal hunter, the cosmic Osiris, whose rising and setting mark not only the passage of time, but the fate of civilizations. The ancients built their world around this truth. The question is whether we are willing to hear it. For thousands of years, human beings have looked to the heavens not only for inspiration, but for survival. The stars were not just pinpricks of light in an endless void. They were clocks, calendars, and in many ways, alarms. Among the ancients, the belief ran deep that the sky was a book of warnings. Every alignment, every eclipse, every shifting of a constellation across the horizon was part of a code, a script that foretold both renewal and destruction. And at the center of many of these warnings, we find Orion, the cosmic signpost whose patterns seem to announce disaster before it struck. To those who studied the heavens in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and beyond, star maps were not innocent charts. They were survival manuals carved into the night. One of the most striking examples comes from the Nile. Egyptian priests who charted the stars did not do so merely to aid navigation or predict harvests. They believed Orion's rising at dawn, its heliacal rising, signaled profound shifts. Connected with Osiris, the god who was slain and resurrected, Orion's return to the morning sky was both a promise and a warning. In their texts, destruction is often paired with rebirth, as though catastrophe were an inevitable part of the cosmic cycle. The annual flooding of the Nile, essential for Egypt's fertility, was itself tied to the heliacal rising of Sirius, Orion's celestial companion. But the texts hint at greater floods, devastating deluges tied not to yearly cycles, but to vast epics. Could it be that the Egyptians encoded in their star maps not only the rhythms of agriculture, but the memory of cataclysms that once reshaped their world? Mesopotamian records echo this theme. The omen texts inscribed on clay tablets, meticulously compiled over centuries, contain chilling correlations. When Orion appeared in unusual positions, or when its stars flickered unnaturally, priests recorded famine, plague, or invasion soon after. These correlations may sound superstitious, but modern science knows that atmospheric disturbances, dust in the air from volcanic eruptions or impacts, and other terrestrial upheavals can indeed alter the appearance of stars. What the Babylonians may have observed was cause and effect, cosmic phenomena coinciding with earthly catastrophe. Their star maps thus became libraries of encoded disaster, a record of what signs in the sky preceded what calamities on the ground. The Greeks absorbed this tradition as well, transforming it into myth and philosophy. Consider the legend of Phaeton, who drove the chariot of the sun too close to the earth, scorching it before being struck down. To many alternative historians, this is not just a story but a memory of a cosmic event, perhaps a comet or asteroid impact, written into myth as allegory. Greek philosophers like Plato spoke explicitly of cycles of destruction by flood and fire, claiming these were regular events linked to the movements of the heavens. He described them as the Great Year, a cycle after which the world would again be purified by catastrophe. In this context, star maps were not neutral. They were warnings, tools to anticipate the return of disaster. Even further afield, the Mesoamerican civilizations treated Orion with similar reverence and fear. For the Aztecs, the new fire ceremony was the most critical ritual of survival. Every 52 years, the priests extinguished all fires in the empire, waiting in darkness to see if Orion's belt would rise in its proper place. If the stars failed to appear, they believed the world would end in fire and destruction. Imagine the terror of entire cities plunged into silence, watching the horizon for a constellation whose absence would mean annihilation. When Orion finally appeared, torches were relit, and life continued for another cycle. This ritual reveals a deep truth. Orion was a cosmic clock counting down to the possibility of disaster. The star map itself was the warning, and the people lived or died by its accuracy. In India, the cyclical yugas described in the Vedic texts point to similar warnings. Each age ends in upheaval, a dissolution before renewal. Orion, known in Vedic tradition as the cosmic hunter or Prajapati, is entwined with myths of death and rebirth. His destruction and restoration echo the same theme found in Egypt and Mesoamerica, that cosmic cycles bring inevitable catastrophe, and that only by recognizing the signs in the sky can humanity brace itself. The Rig Veda speaks of stars falling, of fire and flood sweeping across the world. These are not idle metaphors. They may well be encoded memories of astronomical disasters witnessed by early humans, preserved in myth as warnings for posterity. If these cultures are all telling variations of the same story, what kind of disasters are they pointing to? The most obvious candidates are cosmic, asteroid strikes, cometary debris, and meteor storms. Modern science recognizes that Earth does not move through empty space, but through a minefield of potential threats. The Taurid meteor stream, for instance, is a dense cluster of debris thought to be the remnants of a massive comet that broke apart thousands of years ago. Each year, Earth passes through this stream. Some researchers suggest that large fragments still lurk within it, capable of causing devastation if they strike. Strikingly, the timing of our encounters with the Taurid stream aligns with cycles observed by the ancients. Could it be that star maps highlighting Orion were in fact pointing us to the dangers of these cosmic encounters? The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis suggests that around 12,800 years ago, Earth was struck by fragments of a disintegrating comet, triggering sudden climate change, mass extinctions, and floods remembered in myths around the globe. The sky would have lit up with fire, shockwaves, and floods, an apocalypse seared into human memory. Survivors, scattered and traumatized, may have encoded the timing of such events into myths, rituals, and star charts so that their descendants would remain vigilant. If so, then Orion's placement in ancient maps may not simply celebrate a god or a constellation, but serve as a cosmic caution sign, pointing to the timing of celestial hazards. Skeptics dismiss this as romantic speculation. They argue that alignments and correlations are cherry-picked, that cultures were more concerned with planting and harvesting than with distant cataclysms. Yet this skepticism ignores the extraordinary consistency across civilizations. When Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, India, and the Americas all link Orion to cycles of death and renewal, the pattern demands attention. It is as though different peoples, separated by oceans and centuries, were reading from the same manual, one written in the stars themselves. What makes this idea so unsettling is its implication for us today. If the ancients encoded disasters into their star maps as warnings, then those maps may still be relevant. The same cycles they observed continue. The same alignments recur. Orion still rises, Sirius still blazes, the Earth still precesses on its axis. If cosmic encounters are cyclical, then another disaster is not a question of if, but when. The star maps may not only record the past, they may predict the future. And here is the greatest irony. With our telescopes, satellites, and supercomputers, we are capable of scanning the skies in ways unimaginable to the ancients. Yet they may have known something we have forgotten. That the key to survival is not only in technology, but in memory, in paying attention to the warnings etched across the heavens. The ancients may have tried to pass that warning on to us, carved into pyramids, whispered through myths, and aligned to Orion. But will we listen, or will we dismiss their message as primitive superstition until the sky itself reminds us? The encoded disasters in star maps suggest that history is not linear, but cyclical, a wheel turning endlessly through creation and destruction. Orion stands as both symbol and signal of that truth, the eternal hunter whose rising announces not only the changing of seasons, but the return of catastrophe. The ancients looked up and saw their fate written in his stars. Perhaps we should do the same before it is too late. Throughout human history, knowledge has never been neutral. It has always carried with it power to predict, to control, to command fear, or to inspire hope. And whenever knowledge carried such weight, there were always those who sought to guard it, to withhold it, or to suppress it altogether. Among the most jealously guarded forms of knowledge were the maps of the stars, the codes that linked constellations like Orion not just to agriculture or navigation, but to cosmic cycles and coming catastrophes. What we call today forbidden maps were in ancient times considered sacred, dangerous, or both. They were not simply star charts. They were warnings and weapons, and too powerful, it seems, to be entrusted to common eyes. Legends tell us that Egypt once possessed a set of mysterious documents stored in the House of Life, a temple archive in Heliopolis where the high priest guarded the secrets of heaven and earth. Among these documents were said to be star charts, so precise they mapped not only the visible heavens, but the motions of stars across vast cycles of precession. These were not navigation aids for sailors, but something far more profound: encoded records of disasters, floods, and cosmic upheavals that had struck humanity in earlier ages. If such documents truly existed, why do we not see them today? The answer may lie in deliberate concealment. Over centuries, as dynasties rose and fell, knowledge was carefully sifted. Some was shared, ritual calendars, myths, temple rituals, but the deeper layers remained locked away, passed from priest to priest, pharaoh to pharaoh, hidden from ordinary people who might misunderstand or misuse it. Later conquerors, too, played their part in suppressing such maps. When Alexander the Great's armies swept through Egypt, they encountered not only monuments and temples, but libraries filled with astronomical lore. The Library of Alexandria itself, which grew under the Ptolemies, supposedly housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls, many translated from Egyptian, Babylonian, and even Indian sources. Among them, it is whispered, were detailed maps of the skies and the cycles of disaster they implied. Yet these documents never survived. The library was burned, plundered, neglected, depending on which account you accept, but in every version, priceless knowledge vanished. Was this loss accidental, or was it a calculated effort to erase certain truths that could undermine imperial power or religious control? If humanity knew too much about cycles of catastrophe, about the impermanence of civilizations, perhaps rulers feared their authority would crumble. The suppression was not confined to Egypt. Across Mesopotamia, star knowledge was tightly controlled by priestly elites. Ordinary farmers might be told when to plant and harvest, but only the temple astronomers knew the full catalog of omens, the records of eclipses, comets, and alignments that foretold disaster. Some omens were shared, but others were kept secret, written in cuneiform shorthand that only the initiated could read. These were the forbidden maps, encoded in language as much as in geometry, hidden within clay tablets that sat locked in temple vaults. When empires fell, many of these tablets were smashed or buried, erased as conquerors sought to obliterate the wisdom of their rivals. What survived into the hands of archaeologists is only a fraction, and even that fraction has been selectively interpreted. Scholars translate the tablets but dismiss the ominous connections as superstition, ignoring the possibility that they record real cosmic cycles. In this way, suppression continues, not only by burning but by belittling. Religious authorities also played their role. In the rise of monotheism, many older forms of star lore were declared heretical, pagan, or dangerous. To worship the stars, or even to study them too closely, was condemned as idolatry. Knowledge of alignments, cycles, and encoded disasters was cast into the shadows, often preserved only in secret societies or in esoteric texts disguised as allegories. The Book of Enoch, for example, describes fallen angels teaching humanity the secrets of heaven and earth, knowledge that brought destruction. In some traditions, Enoch himself becomes a keeper of cosmic knowledge, shown the heavenly tablets that recorded all things. Yet these texts were excluded from the biblical canon, labeled apocryphal, hidden away from the mainstream. Was this merely theological preference, or an intentional effort to keep dangerous knowledge from the masses? Throughout the Middle Ages, astrology, an heir to ancient star lore, was tolerated only within strict bounds. Kings and popes kept court astrologers, yet condemned common people for practicing the same art. Why? Because astrology, like the forbidden maps, implied that earthly power was not absolute, that destiny was written in the stars, not decreed by rulers. To suppress star maps was to preserve the illusion of human control. The knowledge survived only in fragments, encoded into symbols of alchemy, Freemasonry, and Hermetic texts, which disguise cosmic cycles and metaphors of death, rebirth, and transformation. These esoteric traditions often placed Orion at the center of their mysteries, hidden in symbols like the blazing star, the cosmic compass, and the ladder to heaven. To the uninitiated, these were harmless emblems. To those in the know, they pointed back to the forbidden maps of old. Modern history has its own episodes of suppression. In the colonial period, missionaries arriving in the Americas often burned native codices, declaring them works of the devil. Among these codices were star charts, calendars, and cosmic prophecies, maps that linked Orion and other constellations to cycles of destruction and renewal. Only a handful survived, such as the Dresden Codex, which contains astronomical tables of incredible accuracy. Imagine what was lost: entire libraries of indigenous star knowledge reduced to ash. Once again, we see the pattern. Knowledge that could have connected the dots between civilizations was systematically destroyed, erased, or buried. And yet, fragments persist. The forbidden maps have a way of surviving in whispers, symbols, and ruins. The alignments of temples still stand. The pyramids still point to Orion. The myths still tell of floods and fires that come again and again. Scholars can dismiss the connections. Rulers can suppress the lore. Missionaries can burn the codices. But the sky itself cannot be silenced. Every night, Orion rises, carrying with it the memory of what the ancients tried to tell us. The forbidden maps, though hidden, still exist, not only in dusty archives, but in the very stars above. The question we must ask is, why? Why has this knowledge been so persistently suppressed? Perhaps the answer is simple: fear. Knowledge of cycles of disaster undermines the stability of civilizations. It tells us that no empire, no kingdom, no church is permanent. That floods, fires, and impacts will come regardless of human ambition. It places power not in the hands of rulers, but in the cosmos itself, an unsettling truth for those who build thrones on the illusion of control. To suppress the maps was to protect authority, to keep humanity focused on obedience rather than on survival. But suppression comes with a cost. Each time knowledge was hidden, destroyed, or dismissed, humanity grew a little more blind to its own history. Each burned library, each lost codex, each forbidden chart severed our connection to the cycles that shape our destiny. And so we find ourselves today with only fragments, piecing together clues from monuments, myths, and alignments, trying to reconstruct what the ancients knew. The forbidden maps may not survive in full, but their echoes still haunt the edges of our history. They remind us that knowledge is never truly destroyed, only hidden, waiting for those willing to see. Perhaps that is why this subject continues to captivate us. On some deep level, we sense that something was taken from us, that truths about the stars and their connection to disaster were deliberately concealed. The forbidden maps symbolize not only lost knowledge, but a lost birthright, the right to understand our place in the cosmos and to prepare for its cycles. The ancients left us monuments, myths, and alignments as breadcrumbs, hoping we would one day piece the puzzle back together. Whether we succeed depends on whether we dare to look past the suppression and face the warnings written in the heavens. In the vast silence of space, Orion blazes brighter than almost any other constellation. Its three-belt stars form one of the most easily recognized shapes in the night sky, guiding shepherds, sailors, and seekers for thousands of years. For the ancients, Orion was Osiris, Prajapati, Sapatsi-Ana, or the hearth of the sky. For modern science, Orion is a stellar nursery, a laboratory of creation where new suns are born. Yet despite the centuries that separate myth from telescope, the overlap between the two is uncanny. What astronomy discovers with technology, myth already intuited in story. And here, in the 21st century, as radio telescopes hum and satellites orbit, Orion continues to reveal itself not merely as a constellation, but as a portal into the deepest mysteries of time, creation, and perhaps even catastrophe. The Orion Nebula, hanging below the belt like a faint mist, is one of the most studied regions of the heavens. Modern astronomers know it as M42, a vast cloud of gas and dust where new stars are forming. With powerful telescopes, we see thousands of suns igniting in its heart, birthing planetary systems that may one day harbor life. For the ancients, this glow was already significant. Egyptian texts referred to Orion as the place of Osiris's rebirth, where the soul of the king would travel after death to be renewed. They saw in its light a cosmic womb, a place where endings were transformed into beginnings. Science, with all its instruments, tells the same story in different words. Orion is indeed a cradle of rebirth, a stellar nursery that proves creation follows destruction. Myth and modernity converge in their interpretation of the same patch of sky. The belt stars themselves, Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka, are massive, unstable suns, burning hot and living short. Their fates are cataclysmic. They will end in supernova explosions, scattering heavy elements across space. Astronomers know that such explosions seed galaxies with the building blocks of planets and life. The ancients without telescopes somehow sensed this cycle. They told stories of gods who died and were reborn, of hunters struck down only to rise again, of floods and fires that destroyed worlds so new ones could be born. In Osiris torn apart and resurrected, in Prajapati slain by Rudra and reborn, we hear echoes of what science now confirms. The stars themselves die violently to give birth to life. Orion's myth was never mere allegory. It was a poetic way of describing truths written in stellar physics. Modern instruments also reveal that Orion is home to the Horsehead Nebula, the Flame Nebula, and countless other clouds where forces of unimaginable power are at work. Star clusters like the trapezium pulse with energy, their radiation carving patterns into the cosmic dust. To the ancients, these glowing shapes were omens and symbols, coded into zodiacs and sacred geometry. Today we photograph them in high resolution, mapping their spectra, analyzing their composition. Yet the wonder remains the same. Whether through naked eyes or the Hubble Space Telescope, Orion inspires because it is not static. It is alive, a theater of cosmic drama. But there is another side to Orion, one that brushes closer to danger than beauty. Astronomers have identified regions of instability, massive stars that will eventually explode, sending shockwaves through interstellar space. Though most lie too far away to directly threaten Earth, the psychological impact remains. Orion is a place of violent endings as much as cosmic beginnings. Myths that tied Orion to destruction, to floods, to catastrophe may not have been entirely unfounded. If ancient peoples witnessed unusual brightness, sudden appearances, or cometary fragments streaming from Orion's direction, they might well have encoded these events as divine warnings. Modern science admits that supernovae, gamma-ray bursts, and comet showers are not myths, but realities of our cosmic neighborhood. What we once called prophecy may have been a record of observation. The link between Orion and comets is especially intriguing. Every year, Earth passes through meteor streams, some of which radiate from Orion's region of the sky. The Orionids, one of the most famous meteor showers, peaks in October, showering Earth with debris from Halley's Comet. To ancient observers, this rain of fire from Orion's direction would have seemed apocalyptic, stars literally falling from the hunter's belt. Egyptian and Mesopotamian texts speak of fiery serpents in the sky, of stars falling like arrows. Today we call them meteors, but the imagery is the same. Orion, both then and now, is associated with streaks of fire that may portend catastrophe. Scientists studying cosmic impacts now take these events seriously. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis proposes that fragments from a disintegrating comet struck Earth about 12,800 years ago, triggering floods and mass extinctions. Interestingly, computer models suggest that some of these fragments may have originated from the Taurid meteor stream, a debris field that Earth passes through regularly. And the radiant of these meteors? Close to Orion. Once again, ancient warnings and modern astronomy converge. Orion is not just a symbol, but a potential source of real, world-shaking danger. Mainstream science, of course, distances itself from myth. Astronomers speak in data, not prophecy. Yet many quietly acknowledge the poetry of the parallels. What myth called Osiris rising, science calls the heliacal rising of Orion, a predictable astronomical event. What myth called fiery serpents, science calls meteor showers. What myth described as gods dying and being reborn, science explains as stellar evolution. The language differs, but the truth is the same. Myth and science are two sides of a single coin, telling the story of Orion in complementary ways. The suppression of star lore, as discussed before, means we lost much of the connective tissue between ancient observation and modern science. But fragments survive. In recent decades, scholars, independent researchers, and even astronomers themselves have begun to notice how ancient myths often contain surprisingly accurate astronomical data. The precision with which temples align to Orion, the recurrence of cycles linked to catastrophic events, the repeated portrayal of Orion as both creator and destroyer. These cannot all be coincidence. It seems likely that ancient priests encoded their knowledge in myth, while modern scientists decode it with instruments. Together, they describe the same reality. What is at stake here is not simply the beauty of Orion, but the possibility that it holds keys to our survival. If Orion was indeed used as a cosmic warning sign, then ignoring its role in cycles of disaster would be dangerous. Science now watches the skies for near-Earth objects, cataloging asteroids and comets that could pose a threat. In some ways, this is nothing new. It is the continuation of the same vigilance the ancients practiced, though under a different name. The ancients used ritual, myth, and temple architecture. We use telescopes, satellites, and computer models. Both are expressions of the same human instinct, to read the heavens for signs of danger and hope. In the end, modern science does not erase Orion's myths. It confirms them. The ancients were right to see Orion as a place of birth, death, and renewal. They were right to associate it with cycles of catastrophe. They were right to use its stars as markers for cosmic timing. The difference is only in the language. They spoke of gods and heroes. We speak of nebulae and supernovae. But the story, at its core, remains unchanged. Orion is the hunter, the eternal signpost, the reminder that humanity's fate is bound to the stars. And so, as we gaze up with telescopes that pierce the veil of light years, we are not doing something entirely new. We are walking in the footsteps of the ancients, continuing the same dialogue with the sky. The myth of Orion has not been replaced by science. It has been enriched by it. And perhaps, just perhaps, the ancients left their myths not only as stories but as bridges, ways to carry knowledge across time until we had the tools to understand it more fully. The warning remains the same. The stars do not lie. Orion is speaking. The only question is whether we will listen. Through the centuries, as empires fell and libraries burned, as priests guarded their scrolls and conquerors destroyed the temples, fragments of star lore still found ways to survive. They did not always survive openly. Often, they slipped into the shadows, carried not by nations but by secret brotherhoods, orders, and societies that thrived in the margins of history. These groups became custodians of mysteries too dangerous, or too precious, to be revealed to the masses. And within their symbols, rituals, and whispered teachings, Orion appears again and again, a constellation whose significance was never lost, only hidden in plain sight. Take the Freemasons, for example. Their origins are cloaked in debate. Some trace them to medieval stonemason guilds, others to the Knights Templar, and still others to far older priesthoods of Egypt and Babylon. What cannot be denied is their obsession with geometry, architecture, and cosmic alignment. Within Masonic lodges, the blazing star is one of the central symbols, often depicted as a radiant five-pointed star hovering above the altar. To outsiders, it is explained as a symbol of divine guidance or enlightenment. To initiates, however, it has deeper layers, pointing to Sirius and Orion, the same stars worshipped along the Nile. The Ladder of Jacob, another Masonic emblem, shows rungs climbing to heaven, ending at the stars. To those trained in symbolism, this ladder is not metaphorical. It is astronomical, an allusion to the soul's ascent through Orion, the cosmic gateway. The Rosicrucians, another enigmatic order, emerged in Europe with manifestos filled with allegories about hidden wisdom, alchemy, and transformation. They spoke of the Book of Nature, a text written not in ink but in symbols visible to those with eyes to see. Their diagrams often show cosmic men, geometric stars, and strange alignments, echoing the sacred geometry of the ancients. Some of their manuscripts depict constellations directly, with Orion standing as the archetype of the initiate who must die and be reborn, echoing the cycle of Osiris. Here again, the secret societies carried forward a story that mainstream history dismissed as myth, embedding it instead into esoteric teachings meant only for the chosen few. The Knights Templar, whose disappearance in the early 14th century remains one of history's great mysteries, are rumored to have discovered arcane knowledge in Jerusalem, perhaps beneath the ruins of Solomon's Temple. Legend suggests they unearthed maps, relics, or scrolls that contained ancient astronomical wisdom. Though much of this is speculative, the Templar cross itself, with its geometric balance, has been interpreted as a symbol of cosmic order. Some researchers believe the Templars were obsessed with Orion, seeing in its belt a heavenly counterpart to the three sacred sites they controlled across the Holy Land. When the order was suppressed, their knowledge did not vanish. Instead, fragments were absorbed into Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, and other currents of esoteric tradition. The forbidden maps of Orion were never truly destroyed. They were encrypted into rituals, symbols, and codes. Even alchemical texts, those dense medieval manuscripts filled with bizarre images of dragons, suns, and crucibles, may hide the same knowledge. Alchemists spoke of the philosopher's stone, a mysterious substance capable of transmutation and immortality. But beneath the surface, many alchemical diagrams can be read as star charts, with constellations hidden in their symbols. Orion, the dying and resurrected hunter, mirrors the alchemist's journey: dissolution, purification, and rebirth. The belt of Orion becomes the three pillars in alchemical engravings, the stars themselves reduced to ciphers for those who could read them. By encoding astronomy into alchemy, initiates preserved cosmic knowledge through centuries of persecution. In Islamic mysticism, the Sufi tradition also contains echoes of hidden star lore. Ancient Persian astronomers revered Orion, calling it Al-Jabbar, the giant. Sufi poets spoke of stars as stations on the soul's journey, with Orion often serving as a metaphor for trials, death, and illumination. While mainstream theology dismissed astrology as heresy, Sufi mystics disguised cosmic knowledge within poetry and allegory. Their verses about love, death, and union often concealed astronomical references, allowing Orion's warnings to survive even in an age of orthodoxy and censorship. What makes this transmission so fascinating is its consistency. Across Europe, the Middle East, and even into Asia, secret currents carry the same patterns. Sacred geometry, stellar cycles, Orion's belt. These themes surface again and again, as though the societies were working from the same manual, perhaps inherited from the priesthoods of Egypt and Babylon. They may not have had the complete maps, but they preserve enough to keep the tradition alive. Symbols became their language, secrecy their shield. And through their initiations, teachings, and rituals, Orion continued to shine as a hidden beacon. Mainstream history treats secret societies with suspicion or dismisses them as eccentric footnotes. But when we trace their symbols back through the centuries, a picture emerges of continuity. The blazing star, the three pillars, the cosmic ladder, all are echoes of the same ancient obsession with Orion and its connection to disaster and rebirth. It is as if these groups carried fragments of a message across time, waiting for an age when humanity would be ready or forced to hear it again. The suppression of this knowledge by rulers and churches only made it more alluring. What could not be spoken openly was hidden in rituals. What could not be carved in stone was drawn in diagrams. What could not be taught in schools was whispered in lodges. The forbidden maps of Orion, once encoded in temples and pyramids, were now encoded in the very structure of secret societies themselves. The geometry of their meeting halls, the alignment of their rituals, the design of their symbols, all carried forward fragments of the star lore. It is tempting to ask whether these groups ever used this knowledge practically. Did the Templars navigate using lost star maps? Did the Rosicrucians anticipate catastrophes encoded in Orion cycles? Did the Freemasons deliberately design cities and buildings to align with constellations, embedding cosmic order into the very fabric of civilization? Evidence suggests they did. Washington, D.C., designed with heavy Masonic influence, contains alignments to Orion and Sirius. Cathedrals in Europe, funded or influenced by Templar wealth, often display star symbolism in their stained glass and floor plans. These are not accidents. They are the faint outlines of forbidden maps resurfacing in architecture, hiding cosmic truth in plain sight. The persistence of these echoes suggests something profound, that even in secrecy, humanity never fully lost touch with its oldest warnings. Orion remained a symbol of vigilance, transformation, and cosmic timing. Those who controlled its knowledge did not always share it, but they kept it alive, passing it forward in coded form so it would not vanish altogether. And now, in an age of rediscovery, when astronomy confirms much of what myth once proclaimed, we can look back at these societies not as relics of superstition, but as guardians of a message too dangerous for their own times. The forbidden maps may not be preserved in papyrus scrolls or stone carvings alone. They live in symbols etched into rings, carved into cathedrals, or whispered in initiation oaths. Orion shines in their rituals like a hidden lighthouse, guiding those willing to look deeper. And if the ancients were right, then these secret transmissions were not simply exercises in mystery. They were acts of survival, ensuring that when catastrophe came again, humanity would have some chance of remembering what the stars were trying to say. Across cultures and across millennia, prophecy has always carried the weight of both fear and fascination. It is the thread that links the seen with the unseen, the present with the future. And when we look closely, we find Orion not only as a constellation of myth and astronomy, but as a harbinger woven into prophetic traditions. Again and again, warnings of future catastrophe appear tethered to this cluster of stars, as though it serves as a cosmic marker pointing towards cycles of destruction and renewal. It is here that myth merges with vision, astronomy with apocalypse, and humanity's deepest anxieties with the cold patterns of the heavens. Consider the Egyptian texts first. The pyramid texts and coffin texts repeatedly speak of the pharaoh's journey to the stars, specifically to Orion. Yet beneath these passages of spiritual ascent lies something more ominous. References to flooding, to fire, to the gods unleashing destruction before renewal. The Egyptian word for Orion, Sa, is connected to the concept of order after chaos. Prophets and priests may have been encoding not only the king's rebirth, but also warnings of cataclysm that would sweep away worlds before a new cycle began. When aligned with modern astronomical evidence, comet showers, cyclical impacts, and supernovae. These texts no longer seem like pure metaphor. They read like coded prophecy, a record of disasters witnessed in the distant past and projected forward into the future. The Hebrew prophetic tradition echoes this theme. The Book of Amos, one of the oldest prophetic texts, explicitly names Orion. Seek him that mocketh the Pleiades and Orion, and turneth the shadow of death into morning. Why Orion? Why mention this specific constellation in a text concerned with divine judgment and cosmic upheaval? Scholars usually gloss it as poetic imagery. But when seen through the lens of archaeoastronomy, the line reads differently. It is a direct association between Orion and cycles of catastrophe, between the movements of the stars and the destiny of nations. Later apocalyptic writings, from the book of Enoch to Revelation, describe stars falling, trumpets blasting, fire raining from heaven. To the casual believer, these are spiritual metaphors. To the initiated, they are astronomical warnings. Orion, blazing in the sky, was both a sign and a signal. Prophetic traditions outside the Near East tell the same story. The Mayans tracked Orion with extraordinary precision, encoding its position into their calendar systems. In their mythology, Orion was the hearth of creation, a place where the gods kindled the fire of the world. But this hearth was not eternally calm. It was a fire that could flare, destroy, and begin again. The Mayan long count calendar, famously ending in 2012, was tied to astronomical cycles that include Orion's alignments. Many misinterpreted that date as predicting the end of the world. In truth, it marked the turning of a cycle, a reminder that the fire in Orion is not static but dynamic. It ebbs and flows, and with it, so too may human civilization. The Hopi of North America also preserved star prophecies. Their sacred stories speak of previous worlds destroyed by fire and flood, with each cycle marked by celestial signs. They describe a blue star Kachina that will appear as a harbinger of the next great purification. Some researchers link this prophecy to a supernova event, possibly tied to the region of Orion, where massive, unstable stars like Betelgeuse are nearing the end of their life. If Betelgeuse were to go supernova, it would shine brighter than the full moon, visible even in the day. For the Hopi, such an event would not be an astronomical curiosity, but the signal of a new age, one born in fire and upheaval. Even in the East, Orion has prophetic resonance. In Hindu cosmology, Prajapati, identified with Orion, is slain by Rudra, marking the destruction of the old order. This story, preserved in the Rig Veda, is cyclical. Prajapati dies, Prajapati is reborn, and the world turns once again. Prophets in India spoke of the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, ending in fiery purification. Though their symbols differ, the underlying pattern matches the Egyptian, the Mayan, the Hopi, and the Hebrew. Orion is tied to endings, to catastrophes, to the breaking of cycles before renewal. Modern science, ironically, reinforces the plausibility of these prophecies. Astronomers warn of the inevitability of cosmic impacts, supernova radiation, and geomagnetic upheaval. The Taurid meteor stream, which Earth passes through every few thousand years, is filled with debris large enough to cause global cataclysm. Some models suggest a significant correlation between catastrophic events in human history and Earth's passage through dense regions of this stream. It's radiant? Near Orion. The ancients did not have telescopes, but they had eyes and memories. They saw fire rain from Orion's direction. They remembered floods that followed. And their prophets, whether Egyptian priests or Hopi elders, spoke of cycles repeating. They may have been warning us of the same dangers astronomers now chart on computer screens. Yet prophecy is never delivered as raw data. It is veiled in imagery, encoded in allegory, hidden in ritual. Why? Because direct warnings are often ignored, while stories endure. A tale of Osiris's death and resurrection survives where a dry record of meteor showers would not. A vision of trumpets and stars falling from heaven remains alive in Scripture. While a technical explanation of comet fragmentation would fade, prophets spoke in symbols not to confuse, but to preserve, ensuring that when the time came, their warnings could still be decoded. Today, as we watch Betelgeuse dim and brighten unpredictably, as astronomers warn of near-Earth objects passing ever closer, as weather patterns shift and natural disasters intensify, we cannot help but feel the echo of those ancient prophecies. The sky seems restless. Orion, so prominent in winter skies, becomes a reminder not just of myth, but of warning. Is it coincidence that cultures across the globe associated this constellation with destruction and renewal? Or is it a pattern we have forgotten to take seriously? If the ancients were correct, Orion is not simply a constellation. It is a cosmic clock, its alignments marking turning points, its stars embodying the eternal cycle of catastrophe and rebirth. Prophets were not merely religious visionaries, but astronomers of a different kind, reading the heavens in language that could survive generations. Their warnings, encoded in myth and prophecy, were designed not for their own people, but for us, for those who would live in the time when the cycle came round again. And so, as modern humanity gazes into the heavens with telescopes, we are also gazing into mirrors of prophecy. The old texts, once dismissed as superstition, now read like veiled descriptions of astronomical events. Orion stands at the center, its stars and its myths woven into every tradition of warning. Whether the next catastrophe comes in our lifetime or in centuries, the message is the same. The stars remember, the cycles return, and humanity must be ready. Prophecy is not fantasy. It is survival written in the language of the heavens. For thousands of years, Orion has hung in the night sky as a constant presence, a celestial hunter chasing his prey across the darkness. To most, it is simply a familiar constellation, a set of bright stars that any child can recognize. But beneath the simplicity lies a terrifying depth. As we piece together fragments of myth, ritual, prophecy, and now science, a pattern emerges. Orion is not merely a constellation. It is a cosmic map, one designed to warn of catastrophe, a blueprint that links the fall of civilizations to cycles written in the heavens themselves. This is the great reveal, the moment when scattered symbols align, when the forgotten whispers of priests and the data of astronomers converge into a single chilling message. The ancients did not choose Orion by chance. Its belt of 3 stars, Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka, formed the foundation of their myths and monuments. The Giza pyramids mirror their alignment. The Mayan hearthstones echo their pattern. The Hopi villages replicate their geometry. These are not random architectural choices. They are markers, signposts etched into the earth to remind future generations that Orion was central to understanding cosmic time. By aligning sacred sites with Orion's belt, ancient builders created a terrestrial map of the sky, ensuring that the message could survive even when texts and languages did not. The monuments themselves became silent prophets. But what is Orion mapping? The answer begins with catastrophe. When we examine the archaeological record, we see a recurring theme: civilizations rising to glory and then collapsing in sudden destruction. Flood myths, fire myths, tales of darkness and renewal repeat across continents. Geological evidence shows that many of these collapses coincide with cosmic events, impacts, sudden climate shifts, solar disruptions. Orion appears again and again as the heavenly witness to these moments, its rising or its belt alignments marking the turning of the age. To the ancients, Orion was not only the gate of the gods, but the clock of disaster. Modern astronomy now provides the mechanism behind the myth. The Taurid meteor stream, through which Earth passes, contains vast amounts of debris from a giant comet that fragmented thousands of years ago. Periodically, our planet encounters denser regions of this stream, triggering meteor showers, firestorms, and sometimes catastrophic impacts. The radiant point of many of these showers is near Orion, meaning the meteors seem to emerge from its direction. Imagine what the ancients saw: blazing streaks of fire pouring from Orion's belt, turning night into day, devastating the land. To them, Orion became forever linked with celestial wrath. Their myths of fiery serpents, falling stars, and gods wielding weapons of light are not imagination. They are memory. When we read the old prophecies with this in mind, their true nature is revealed. The Egyptians wrote of the god Sa, Orion, as both a place of rebirth and a harbinger of destruction. The Hebrews warned of Orion in apocalyptic tones. The Mayans tied their calendar cycles to its position. The Hopi foresaw purification linked to a star from Orion's region. All these voices, separated by oceans and centuries, echo the same truth. Orion was the cosmic alarm, the map of when and where the next disaster would come. The chilling part is that the cycle is not complete. The Taurid meteor stream still crosses Earth's orbit. Astronomers admit that massive objects, perhaps kilometers wide, still lurk in its debris. One impact from such a body would be enough to trigger the very cataclysms described in ancient myths: floods, fire, the collapse of civilizations. The ancients saw it happen before. They encoded their warning in stone and story. Now, in our age of satellites and telescopes, we see the data confirming what they already knew. Orion is not simply a hunter, it is a harbinger. The forbidden maps, hidden in sacred architecture, secret society symbols, and mythic cycles suddenly make sense. They are not random obsessions with stars. They are instructions, a cosmic survival manual transmitted across ages. The three pyramids of Giza pointing to Orion's belt, the Hopi villages scattered across Arizona in the same pattern, the Mayan hearthstones echoing the same geometry, all are part of the same map. A map telling us where to look, what to watch, and when to be ready. Orion is not only a constellation, it is a code. The cycle of catastrophe and renewal tied to Orion may even explain the rise and fall of civilizations themselves. Perhaps the dark ages that followed collapses were not simply political accidents, but cosmic resets. A comet strikes, the climate shifts, floods rise, fires rage. Survivors cling to memory, encoding their warnings in temples, prophecies, and rituals. Over generations, those warnings become myth, myth becomes religion, and religion is dismissed by science. Until science, centuries later, rediscovers the evidence of impacts, cycles, and orbits, and realizes the myths were right all along. Humanity has been here before, standing on the edge of a cycle, staring up at Orion, wondering if the hunter's bow will strike again. If Orion is indeed a cosmic map of catastrophe, then its message is not one of despair, but of preparation. The ancients could not stop the cycles, but they could mark them. They left their clues not to terrify, but to guide. Their monuments, prophecies, and rituals are not only stories of gods, but blueprints for survival, urging us to watch the skies, to understand the heavens, to remember that we are not separate from the cosmos, but bound to its cycles. The hunter's stars do not lie. They tell us that destruction comes, but also that renewal follows. Death, yes, but also rebirth. The great reveal, then, is not that Orion is a constellation of myth, or even that it is a stellar nursery of science. It is both, and more. It is the clock of catastrophe, the warning bell of cycles, the map drawn in stars that tells humanity, you have been here before, you will be here again. Ignore it, and you fall with the forgotten empires. Heed it, and you may endure. Orion shines above us, not as a decoration, but as a message. The ancients saw it. The secret societies preserved it. Prophecy repeats it, and now science confirms it. The question is not whether Orion is speaking. The question is whether we are listening. Night after night, through every generation that has ever lifted its gaze to the heavens, Orion has remained. Long before pyramids rose or temples crumbled, before languages were written or myths were sung, those three bright stars of the belt crossed the horizon, faithful and unchanging. Empires burned, floods swept coasts, mountains collapsed into dust, Yet Orion's hunter shape endured, a silent sentinel watching over the fragile drama of human life. It is this constancy that has made Orion more than a constellation. To the ancients, it was Osiris reborn, the cycle of life and death. To astronomers today, it is a stellar nursery and a field of future explosions. But beyond myth and science, Orion is something else, a reminder. A reminder that the universe is larger than our fleeting empires, and yet, mysteriously, that our fate is bound to its rhythm. The closing of this story is not an ending, but a reflection on what Orion truly represents. It is both the keeper of ancient memory and the promise of eternal renewal. Civilizations that watched its rising in the east may have vanished, but their warnings remain carved into stone, woven into prophecy, whispered in rituals of secret brotherhoods. They saw in Orion both beauty and terror, the beauty of cosmic order and the terror of catastrophe. And we, standing under the same stars thousands of years later, must decide whether those warnings were superstition or whether they were meant for us. When you stand outside on a clear winter night and trace Orion's shape against the black canvas of the sky, you are engaging in the same act as pharaohs, Mayan astronomers, Sufi poets, and Hopi elders. The hunter's belt gleams, as it always has, pointing towards Sirius, guiding travelers, inspiring myths. The Orion Nebula glows, faintly, the cradle of stars. Betelgeuse flares and dims unpredictably, a star nearing its violent end. Nothing about Orion is static. It is alive, shifting, breathing in cosmic time. And as it moves, so too does human history, pulsing to the rhythm of cycles we barely understand. Perhaps that is Orion's greatest message, that we are not separate from the cosmos, but participants in its unfolding story. The ancients knew this instinctively. They lived in harmony with the sky, marking the rising and setting of Orion as milestones in their calendars, their festivals, their very sense of time. Today, under neon lights and digital screens, we have forgotten the sky. Few know when Orion rises or sets. Few trace its belt across the heavens. And yet, whether we notice or not, the hunter still keeps his watch, indifferent to our distractions, waiting to remind us of the larger picture. If Orion is the eternal watcher, then what it has watched is sobering. It has seen ice ages grip the earth, meteors strike with catastrophic force, floods sweep away whole cultures. It has seen golden ages too, periods of flourishing art, science, and discovery. It has seen humanity forget and remember, rise and fall. It has seen us as children of the earth, trying to make sense of the stars, sometimes revering them, sometimes fearing them, sometimes ignoring them altogether. And still, silently, the watcher endures. The myths, prophecies, and secret transmissions all agree on one point. Orion is not just background decoration. It is a signal, a reminder that destruction and renewal are woven into the same cosmic fabric. If Orion was the clock of catastrophe, then perhaps its ultimate gift is not fear, but perspective. Civilizations may collapse, but humanity has the power to endure if it listens, if it prepares, if it learns to see the cycles not as doom, but as transformation. For every fire, there is a rebirth. For every flood, a new dawn. That is why Osiris rose from death, why Prajapati was reborn, why the Mayan hearth was rekindled. Orion is the watcher of endings, but also of beginnings. And so we are left with a haunting duality. On the one hand, Orion is eternal, its stars shining long after our lifetimes, long after our cities crumble. On the other hand, it is also fragile because those same stars are unstable giants destined for violent deaths. Betelgeuse will one day explode, its light flooding our skies, perhaps terrifying future generations. Alnilam and Alnitak too will one day collapse, scattering their elements into the galaxy. Orion itself, the constellation we know so well, will not last forever. Its shape will distort as stars die. New ones are born, and cosmic winds reshape the nebulae. The eternal watcher is eternal only in relation to us, not in relation to the universe. Even Orion is mortal in the long arc of cosmic time. And perhaps that too is its message. Nothing lasts forever. Not empires, not civilizations, not even constellations. Yet in impermanence lies the mystery of renewal. To close the story of Orion is impossible, because Orion is not a story with an ending. It is a mirror. When we look at it, we see not only the stars but ourselves, our fears, our hopes, our myths, our science. We see how deeply we crave meaning in the vast silence of the cosmos. We see how we cling to cycles of prophecy and destruction as a way of making sense of chaos. We see, too, that perhaps the universe has been speaking all along, and that Orion is the clearest phrase in its language. Whether we interpret it as Osiris rising, a hunter's bow, a stellar nursery, or a cosmic clock, the truth is the same. Orion watches, and in its watch, it teaches. So tonight, when you step outside and the cold air touches your skin, look for those 3 stars aligned so perfectly in a straight line. Imagine the pharaohs aligning their pyramids to them. Imagine the Hopi placing their villages in the same pattern. Imagine the prophets lifting their eyes in awe and dread. Imagine secret societies encoding its shape in their symbols, waiting for a time when its meaning would resurface. And imagine the countless generations to come who will stand under the same stars and feel the same strange pull of Orion's gaze. That is the true eternity, not the stones, not the texts, but the human connection to the sky. The eternal watcher is not only in the heavens. It is within us, in our memory, our myths, our capacity to read the signs and to act. Orion's stars remind us of catastrophe, yes, but also of resilience. They tell us that though worlds fall, those cycles turn, life endures, transforms, and rises again. The hunter will one day fade, but by then, humanity may have carried its story to other worlds, leaving Orion behind, but carrying its lesson forever. As the ancients knew, as science now rediscovers, the stars are not silent. They whisper warnings, they sing of cycles, they hold maps of destiny. And Orion, bright, commanding, eternal to our eyes, is their loudest voice. To stand beneath, it is to stand beneath the weight of history and the promise of the future. To look at it is to confront both our fragility and our strength. Orion remains, the eternal watcher of the night sky, gazing down as it has always done, waiting for us to remember what it has been trying to say all along.